Welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. Now, I have to tell you, I am not and have never been a member of a union, but organized labor is near and dear to my heart. You notice that guy on the left over there? There's no gray in the beard. He's not wearing any glasses. Looks about at least 15 pounds lighter. But that's me. That's me in 1990, 22 years ago, many, many lives ago, I had a consulting relationship with the National Postal Mail Handlers Union. And here we are at a job action in Philadelphia protesting management intransigence and intimidation. And it was quite a wonderful experience. For about 4 years, I was basically the minister of propaganda for this union, and I feel like I fought the good fight. I'm showing you this picture for no other reason than when Judy Ansell gave me a call, well, I don't know, several months ago, and said, you know, Lincoln Cushing, this great book about labor posters, I've been trying to get you guys interested in this for a while, and I said, this is great. I really want to do something like this. You know, Judy, as you may know, is the director of the Institute for Labor Studies at UMKC. She's been doing that since 1988, which is to say 2 years longer than I was in that picture. She has been a union member of two unions. This is Judy's program to a large extent. She's pulled together the co-sponsors, and it was her original contact with Lincoln Cushing that got us started. So for tonight's formal introduction, please welcome Judy Ansell.
Thanks, Henry. This is the first program that the Institute for Labor Studies has done with the library, and I really want to thank Henry Fortunato for being open to this and for beginning a relationship which I hope will last for a long time. Henry and I both share a passion that working people should be using the library, coming to library events, and that's what he wants to see. He wants to see lots of union members and working people in the library, reading books and attending events. And I want to see the library doing programs on issues of work and about the values that built the labor movement, the values of cooperation, the values of looking out for your brothers and your sisters, because I think that makes great programming for our public library. I wanted to do this program since my friend Alice Kitching gave me a copy of Lincoln Cushing's book on labor, American labor posters. And so we began by doing a interview with him on our radio show, the Heartland Labor Forum. One of our volunteers, Patricia Ingram, did this fabulous interview with Lincoln and his co-author, Timothy Drescher, back in September of 2010. And one of the things Lincoln said on that interview was that what makes a good poster is one that grabs the viewer and agitates them. And I said, this guy has something to say that we all need to hear about the importance of labor arts. He talked about one of the most important posters in history on that show, which was, remember that poster which showed a slave ship and the layout of how they placed the slaves on the ship? Probably one of the most important posters in our history. And, you know, it made me think, and it made me think that we all need to hear more about this. You can hear that interview on the Institute for Labor Studies website if you want to go to it. It's a really good one. Earlier this month, I was on vacation in Oakland, California, and I was visiting a friend, and she said, there's an interesting exhibit at the Oakland Museum. It's called All of Us or None, Social Justice Posters of the San Francisco Bay Area. And so we went to the Oakland Museum, and lo and behold, the curator of that show was none other than Lincoln Cushing. And we went in there, and there was this guy talking, pontificating to a group of very interested viewers of the exhibition, and sure enough, it was Lincoln. And I said, "Ha, you're coming to Kansas City." And he said, "Oh my gosh, yes." And so we met there by accident. Lincoln is an author and an archivist who specializes in social movements. He currently works for as a digital archivist of the Kaiser Permanente group, where he researches and writes about national health care programs, long history from the shipyards of World War II to their current labor management partnerships at Kaiser. Previously, he was the cataloging and electronic outreach librarian at the University of California, Berkeley's Bancroft Library, and he held a similar position at the UC Berkeley's Institute for Industrial Relations Library, where he produced several top-ranking websites on labor issues, established an ongoing labor photo gallery, online archive, and created the first free public database of full-text union contracts. His book, Agitate, Educate, Organize, American Labor Posters, was published in 2009 by Cornell University Press. His webpage is doxpopuli.org. And I want to thank him for coming, thank the library for hosting this, and thank a number of unions and labor organizations for helping us bring him here by co-sponsoring, starting with the Greater Kansas City AFL-CIO, the Greater Kansas City Building Trades Council, the United Auto Workers Community Action Project, CAP Council, Service Employees Union, Local 1, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 124, Kansas City Jobs with Justice. Be sure to stop by their table. They're sponsoring a minimum wage initiative. And the Institute for Labor Studies, and we have a table too. You can get on our mailing list. And be sure to pick up a flyer for the teach-in we're doing at the end of September, where we're bringing in economist Jamie Galbraith and having our own Bill Black talk about jobs and why we need them. If you want to get a book after the show, Lincoln will be signing books, and there's a table for that outside. So enjoy the program and think about its implications for us as artists and activists in Kansas City. And I want to welcome Lincoln Cushing.
Thank you all for coming, brothers and sisters. Thank you, Kansas City Public Library, for hosting this. And thank you, Judy, for thinking of this. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's hard to stop me from talking about posters. In truth, I'm really more a poster scholar than a labor historian, although I stumble across labor history all the time. But what I'm going to talk about today is one slice of poster history, which has to do with the role of representation of working people and the organizations that support them. So we're talking about two marginalized communities in this country, unfortunately. Poster art, which is really not recognized as an art form. It's considered commercial art, which is secondary, and labor, which in this country does not have the strength that it should have. So we're dealing with two slices of the pie that need to benefit from each other to grow and to be stronger. So I'm going to look at some of the history that we've got based on research in the United States and Canada of posters, and I want to draw some parallels between those movements and other things and raise some broader questions about the intersection of culture and politics. So this is the book. I did it with a colleague of mine who was a professor at San Francisco State, and it's always nice collaborating on a project. Sometimes when you do something by yourself, you skip a few beats. When you're working with somebody else, it's a reality check. And so the two of us worked really well together on putting this book together. We co-wrote it, and we researched these. We traveled around to archives all over the country, special collections. Many public libraries have special collections as well. These are not in one giant repository in this country. And one of these lessons is, as I said, it's a marginalized subject area. There is no great American labor history museum in this country, which there should be. There are pockets here and there. Many of them are academic institutions. So it takes a lot of digging in order to pull this stuff together. Fortunately, through modern media, through electronic tools, so forth, it's easy to start sharing these in a way that was really not possible or practical even 15 years ago. So it's a wonderful time to be doing this sort of research. This is the cover that we didn't use for the book. It represented a sort of fantasy view of labor management government partnership that we just didn't think was very accurate. So we rejected this cover. They also misspelled his name. But this was a World War II fantasy and in some ways a reality. But that was World War II and this is now. So what are we talking about here? Why am I raising this? You walk down the street, you're driving down, you see a bunch of people, they might be hollering something. What's going on? It's a crowd of people. When you start getting signage, when you start getting identification, all of a sudden you know what's going on. They know what they're talking about, the public knows what's going on, the news media know what's going on. All of a sudden, you're lending a level of sort of integrity of subject to a group of people. And it's t-shirts, it's buttons, it's placards, it's posters. All of these things conspire to help get the message across. And it's not just to the outside, it's also among yourselves. It's to your brothers and sisters that are on the line. It's to your family when you go home. Your kids want to get a shirt. I mean, the whole idea is this is identification of something that you're proud of and that you care about. Graphic imagery is central to that. And so you can see here where this really is starting to get across the message of a movement. So here's just a couple of great quotes about posters and the intersection with politics. Barbara Ehrenreich, who we all know has been doing some wonderful work about understanding the realities and circumstances of working people in this country. You know, this was the Hospital Workers Union in New York, which is one of the unions that's always been very good in the contemporary field of understanding the role of culture. Here's one farther back from the Spanish Civil War, describing posters as soldiers of paper and ink. Another term that I've heard describing posters is paper bullets. These are real documents that can make a real impact. They're not just, oh, you know, it's posters. And you know, I'll digress a little bit here about the intersection between a lot of organized labor and a lot of artists. It's an awkward relationship. A lot of artists don't quite know how to engage with labor, and very often, unfortunately, labor says, oh, we're having a May Day event, let's invite a couple of singers. And then there's the speeches. I mean, you really need to integrate culture fully into the organizing of a campaign. You can't just bring people in as window dressing. And artists need to understand that unions are organizations with their own quirks, with their own set of protocols, and it's not necessarily easy to jump in and start working for a union. So there's a little bit of give and take on both parts, but it's really, really important. And what we're going to start seeing here are some examples where artists of various stripes have worked closely with unions and with labor support groups to try to change conditions for working people in this country and change policy and change practice. This is the poster that Judy was talking about, which I think is one of the most stunning, and it's sort of one of the earliest examples of a commissioned piece of art designed to change public policy. If you'll notice, this is about what's called a regulated slave trade. For a while, they set a set of guidelines for how many slaves you could pack aboard a ship. If you packed too many, that was illegal. And the notion of slavery itself was okay, as long as you didn't overpack the slaves. And so it's sort of a crazy concept at this point to realize that there was such a thing as a regulated slave trade. But what was going on with this poster was it was a broad abolitionist statement, but it was also supporting the lives of the sailors that were also being exploited aboard these ships. The slaves were obviously being super exploited, but the sailors that were often shanghaied or dragged onto these ships to staff them, they were also getting killed. They were dying of diseases. They were being murdered. Many of them didn't make it back. This was a really dangerous occupation. And so this part of this was to improve the conditions of the sailors themselves and saying, this is just an untenable situation. We're talking 1789. So this graphic, which was commissioned by an abolitionist, by someone who had seen what the slave ships were like, most of the public never knew. The slaves, they come, they go. Most people were never aboard a slave ship unless you were a sailor or a slave. And so for the general public, what this does was it opens their eyes to saying, oh my God, this is barbaric. So the idea of commissioning art and that's informed by reality and putting it on a piece of paper, distributing that piece of paper, and trying to change public policy is what a poster is. A poster is not just a print. It's not just ink on paper that lives on a gallery wall somewhere. If it's posted on a wall, it's a poster. So labor has a long tradition of using graphics. The obvious place to start is logos. How do you define your own organization? How do you get people to know who you are? And so the clasped hands is clearly one of the earliest symbols of labor, of solidarity, of union. The very term union is the clasping of hands, of joining together. You've got the globe. We're thinking big here, okay? So, and you've got Latin, which of course is, shows you really highfalutin. But this is an early symbol of, this is organized labor. This is what we're about. This is about brotherhood and sisterhood. And so all unions at some point have some sort of a logo to describe themselves, to share what they are and how they work with the world. And these cover different ranges of time, but look at the CWA graphic there, where you've got a telephone, old-style telephone. You've got a telegraph. You've got a microphone. Well, some of these logos are clearly more modern. You've got the chemical and energy workers. So, and logos do get updated as the craft changes, as technology changes, as the unions change. They will sometimes change their logo itself. But this is the first step of identification of graphics and trade unionism and workers. So here's a very simple way of just tying those into a poster. This was an early strike in the Bay Area about the Bay Area Rapid Transit, and these were the 3 unions that all represented the workers on BART. So it's a simple way of throwing a graphic in about a strike, and it's pride in the unions. The graphics themselves show the BART trains. So this is a simple way of starting to use graphics to express yourself. But then it goes deeper than that, and so what we explore in the book is different ways that different themes which have emerged are all about the broad subject of labor, not just unions, but about conditions of working people. And there's an awful lot of organization that happens for working people that is outside of unions. There's a lot of labor support groups, a lot of church groups work with labor, there's a lot of immigration and civil rights groups. There's a broad range of organizations that deal with labor, not just unions. But unions are clearly a lot of the focus of this. But the way we did this book is we did this survey of all these archives, shot a lot of posters, and then came back, printed them all out, and spread them out all over the floor. And we let them describe themselves to us in terms of subjects. And certain subjects rose to the top as being clearly, these are areas where the posters speak for themselves. And so one really important area was the notion of dignity and exploitation. Here's one of my favorites. It's not a particularly graphically strong poster, but the slogan, "The masses are the makers of history," I think it's just elegant. It really describes the fact that this is the history of the 99%. That is, these are the people that put bread on your table that never get recognized or acknowledged. And also it points out that, for example, a lot of people don't know that the California farm workers had a very strong Filipino presence. Most people think, oh, Chicanos. No. Philip Vera Cruz, who was the vice president of farm workers, was Filipino. So there was a lot of different constituencies as part of the organization that also have gotten lost in their own history and in the public history. But it's a really sweet poster. Very simple poster, but this is for an event at Berkeley. Here you start getting more examples of sort of the notion of dignity of workers, and even using the word dignity. And So this is really important because you start to point out that there are these people in the background. In libraries, there's what's called technical services. They're the people that catalog the books, put the stuff on the shelves. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the background of a library that is totally invisible to the general public, but it's essential to making the library operate. That's the way it is with most things. So the notion that there are all these people who are going about their lives, doing their work, and they're doing it, they're not looking for, getting on the front cover of New York Times, but they want a little bit of respect and a little bit of dignity for what they do, and they want to be treated well. This one here about what happens to teachers who generally get underpaid to begin with, and the whole issue of pensions. Pensions is on the table right now. Pensions are seen as the boogeyman of our economic collapse. Well, I don't think so. I don't think that public service pensions are what's causing this country to collapse. There's a difference of opinion here. The whole idea of the consequences of automation. And yeah, technologies change, industries change, but they shouldn't kick out entire classes of workers. And so what do you do when something like that comes along? Do you stick your heels in the dirt and say, we're not going to do anything? Or you do like what the longshoremen said when container ships come along, they say, okay, we'll agree to container ships as long as our guys get trained and we get to work on this. As long as there's the jobs, you don't stand in the way of technology, but you also don't let the bosses use that as a way to just get rid of entire sectors of your workforce. So these are some from the 50s and 60s out of Detroit. Really interesting stuff, the consequences of automation. Here's another one about pensions. Too old to work, too young to die. Raise your hands if that's a familiar theme. And a CIO. The CIO was doing some really good stuff, because they were much more militant than certain portions of the AFL. Their approach to organizing was different. And so some of the most militant material out of the higher level coalitions of unions was coming out of the CIO. Health and safety. This is something which, unless you're in a particular area of occupational health or something like that, you don't think about it, but the fact is, it's a daily hazard for most workers. Postal workers, steel workers, everybody's exposed to some level of occupational hazard. And making the workplace a safe place to work so you come home, that you're not fatigued, that you haven't lost fingers and toes, that you're going to be able to go to work the next day, it's really, really important. This is by my friend Doug Minkler. This is when VDTs first came out and people were starting to work, we're going from typewriters to video displays. And these early displays were just like giant TVs shooting gamma rays right at you. And the early displays were dangerous. And it took workers fighting back and saying, I'm not going to sit in front of this thing. I want some protections about the keyboards. I want some protections about the screen. It takes workers to help set the standards so that it's a safe place to work. Very often the product designers don't think about that as much. It takes the end user to say, this is unsafe. This is what we need to do to change it. This is one of mine about just stress. Stress is an occupational hazard. And if you've got a boss that's ragging on you, or if you've got too much pressure, it eats you. It means that you are snapping at your family, you don't eat well, you don't sleep well. It causes a lot of health problems. Well, stress needs to be addressed as well. There's a broad range of things that fall under occupational health and safety. It's a great one from the nurses. People need to fight for good working conditions and so forth. This is just a goofy one. I don't even know what it means, but it's a great safety poster. Women. Well, early trade union movement was all men. And it took a while for women to start being involved in the trade union movement and being addressed by labor conditions. But, so, here's a good one. It's not fair. We need to fight this. This points out the role of humor in organizing. Sometimes if you beat someone over the head with an issue, they're not going to change their mind. But very often humor, satire, sarcasm are incredibly efficient. If you go picket some CEO's house and you're just talking about how bad they are, everybody knows the way that plays out. But if you do street theater and you do a parody, all of a sudden there's a whole different tone to it. And in some ways, that's more incisive and more critical than just laying out the facts. So people need to pay attention to how their culture plays out and different ways of using fiction and nonfiction and theater, and there's all these different ways to do it. That's where cultural workers can help organizers. This is by my friend Nancy Hom. Very simple, very graphic poster about the role of women in organizing. So here we've got, our former governor, Arnie, my man. But so here a poster about campaigns, and you'll notice this graphic, which many of you are very familiar with. And so some people call her Rosie the Riveter, but she's really not quite Rosie the Riveter. She was really produced for Westinghouse. This was during the war. They were done at the same time. The actual Rosie the Riveter image was the cover of Saturday Evening Post, and it shows a woman with a lunchbox, very similar pose, but these two often get mixed up. But this image is one of the most enduring legacies of labor graphics. This has been used in so many incarnations. This is just from the 2008 political campaigns, okay? Which candidate did not use this graphic? This has become totally iconized within our culture. I mean, this image is everywhere, and it's strong women. It's a great image to have as part of our arsenal, and it's great that it's gotten ripped off so many times, because it shows that we got something to say. This one's about abortion in Mexico. I mean, this image has been used a million times. I see a version of this probably 6 times a year. Another thing to look at is, well, how do you draw in old images to new issues? Because recycling is a time-honored tradition in the art community. The notion that some artist comes up with a great idea just all by themselves is just not true. Everybody appropriates, everybody is inspired by, it's life. You see something great, you go, I'm going to try doing that a different way. So this was a graphic that was done the turn of the century, but it was recycled as a modern poster, and it was, she added the words, the $, sacred motherhood, talking about the exploitation of women in these sweatshops. This one over here, which I think is a lovely it brings up the sweatshop into the modern age with people hunkered over their VDT terminals. And you've got mice running around, and you've got the sweatshop conditions brought into the modern age, which is not far from the truth. If you go to some of these call service centers in Bangladesh, it's an exploitive working condition. So the notion that sweatshops are old and in the past history is an illusion and a fantasy. Race and civil rights is another theme that really rises to the top. And again, you realize that even though the labor movement at the very beginning was pretty racist and pretty sexist, it rose to the occasion. It realized this is crazy. If we're really going to be recruiting people, if we're really going to be representing workers, we need to get past that. And many unions have been really, really on the ball about that. Again, UAW was really good about this. A lot of the workers coming into the factories in Detroit. It's a great slogan. There's no prejudice in kids unless adults put it there. There's a notion that prejudice is a learned skill. It's not. People aren't born with it. So the idea that we have to take responsibility for this, the Fair Practices Department was publicizing this in their facilities. Equal pay, equal work, equal rights. This is a great poster about civil rights and civil liberties. The notion that labor often bears the brunt of bad policies and bad police treatment and bad treatment by other law enforcement officials. And so here, this is Colorado, 1906, when the miners were organizing. Bill Haywood apparently designed this himself. The whole notion, well, is Colorado in America? We've lost so many civil rights and civil liberties. Are we some crazy foreign land? No, this is happening here. The idea that bringing it home. I mean, one of the organizing campaigns of the anti-war movement, the Vietnam War movement, was saying, we're bringing the war home. We're talking about what's going on. Black soldiers are saying, we're not going to fight yellow brothers. I mean, Cassius Clay, we said, I'm not going to go fight in Vietnam. No Vietnamese ever called me nigger. The whole notion of the relationship between the home and some foreign land where things are different, you connect those two, you can really make a political statement that's very powerful and resonating. So look at all these issues where labor was getting totally screwed by forces of authority. Another thing that comes up is the notion that there is this internationalism and solidarity of workers around the world. Here again, another one of Doug Minkler's out of the Bay Area, talking about how in the modern age, you can start doing organizing around, when a ship goes from one harbor to another, well, nowadays with the internet and with YouTube and so forth, you can do international organizing in a much different and much more powerful way than you could before. So using new tools, saying, we know what's going here, and we're gonna boycott this ship coming into our harbors because there's a strike going on in Liverpool. So the notion that it's easier for labor to know no international bounds is really, really an important thing. And it makes it, because globalization means capital can run freely around the world, labor has to do the same thing. This is a really sweet poster by a Bay Area trade union organization about supporting the boycotting Chile because the dictatorship was supported by the US government. And if you look at it, it's a very different kind of a graphic for a labor poster. It's not strong, militant, a bunch of people with fists and, well, it's one person down by the docks, but it's the dignity of what one person can say and saying, it's our fight too. This is the idea that international solidarity really does mean something. And if your brothers and sisters are being exploited in South Africa or in Chile or in Bangladesh, it's going to blow back on us, and we need to all be together on that. Again, bringing together the old and the new. Walter Crane was doing some wonderful stuff at the turn of the century, the turn of the last century in England. And so this wonderful May Day poster, well, this has been brought up to date with modern unions, modern clothing, modern slogans, but again, honoring this long tradition of labor organizing and art. And it's a really sweet piece. This is something which is much more obvious as what you'd expect out of labor posters, but you get some great variations of this. Organizing sex workers. I mean, this is, there's a lot of people being organized now that were never on the charts of AFL-CIO. So, everybody deserves, good working conditions. Sometimes you get the goofy posters. You're like, well, okay. I mean, sometimes these are great. Now, strikes and boycotts, this is great, because there's a lot of good stuff, and some of the most militant and some of the most outrageous stuff has been done around these subjects. But here, we're going back, turn of the century here. You could almost do a whole book just on the themes in this one poster, and you've got, the capitalism, writing labor, and you've got in the background, you've got the new era, and there's a lot going on here, but this is typical of that style of art. I mean, it's not what we do now, but it really represents this long tradition of how art was trying to educate the population about labor issues, was trying to get their point across. It's a gorgeous poster, but it's not the style now. But nowadays, for example, one of the most successful campaigns was the farm workers. And what the farm workers did that was brilliant was organizing a consumer boycott. And the consumer boycott jumped also, it was like a wildfire. All sorts of student groups, church groups, people were going crazy saying, yeah, we want to support this, we want to help you out. And so there are all these campaigns around boycott grapes, boycott lettuce. And so what I have here, this is where you start seeing some of the benefits of the research. This is the poster that was produced. And on that side is the original artwork with a little note that we saw. And this is at the Walter Reuther Archives in Detroit. And you'll notice they made the guns pop guns to make them less threatening. Because you don't want to scare people away. You want to get the message across, but they made them pop guns, and they made him a little bit of a caricature. So you want to get the idea across, but you don't want to scare people away. So Don't drink gallo. Here's another gallo. The rat is a classic labor image. You'll go to a demonstration, there's a giant inflatable rat. You know, the rat as the evil boss, the evil, you know, manager is a classic graphic image. You'll notice also this is on tractor feed paper from old computers. This was free paper. This is what a lot of stuff was done in the 60s and 70s. Now this is a subject that a lot of people don't think of when they think of labor, but any of you who've been involved with the union, you know, getting out the vote is really a big deal. And I think that certainly a lot of portions of this country don't give labor credit for how much they've been part of encouraging the democratic process in this country. Labor is really, really good about helping to get out the vote, getting people to the polls, raising the issues. And so this is Ben Shahn, a gorgeous piece. The idea that, you know, labor supports people getting out and voting. This is part of why we're here. This is a democratic right. This is a wonderful piece. Women's work counts. Sometimes you get mixed messages here. You know, this is from '48. You know, we're looking at the beginning of, you know, heavy anti-communism in this country, and so the things on the left are the things that we're for. We're obviously against foreignism and collectivism, slavery, chaos, poverty, bad things. But I frankly am for collectivism. But this is 48. So what this raises is another thing that's important that's based on the research. When you start to look at the broad swath of political posters of all stripes produced in this country, you realize that there's a giant gap. Between 1945 and 1965, there are very, very few political posters made. And that's because it was dangerous to make political posters. Not only unions, but individual artists. The long arm of McCarthyism, anti-communism, people would knock on your door and say, did you know that your, you know, so-and-so is a member of the Communist Party? Did you know that your employee is a member? It was really dangerous to make this form of art. So people moved to other forms of art. People did songs. People did poetry. But something that was public, that had your name on it, that was on a wall, basically disappeared in this country for almost 20 years. This is another great area where, again, it lends us to really understanding our own history, and very often things that you don't know. We've all heard of Mother Jones, really sweet poster about her. Again, there's a little bit of text that describes who she is for the uninitiated. A lot of people know Lucy Parsons, but they don't know that she was Latina. And so this is a poster by an artist out of the Chicago area, Carlos Cortez. Did a lot of wonderful stuff for the IWW. And you know, the Industrial Workers of the World were a labor organization that was extremely tuned in to how culture works. And they had songbooks and theater and posters. They understood art as an organizing tool more than almost any other labor group. You got Tom Mooney, who was, you know, indicted for bombing, but you tie in poetry and him in prison. And culture. I'll bring back to culture, which is, that's what we're all about. And the role that, you know, labor has played a long role in culture. I mean, the book, The Jungle, which blew the lid on the meatpacking industry, well, Upton Sinclair made a film about it. Little known film. The originals apparently have been lost. The original footage has disappeared. But this is a poster that was made for it. The film Matewan, John, you know, Sayles, I mean, really important film about, you know, bringing in the Pinkertons to break up a strike. Norma Ray. Films have always been really, really important source for, and even popular films have raised the issue of labor to the general public. Rock posters, the whole idea that there was an intersection between the counterculture and labor is often lost, but it's really true. I mean, over there you've got, you know, a fundraising event for the farm workers and for the whales. Here is a car rally in support of the farm workers. So the idea that the counterculture supported various aspects of labor. These are great. These are poetry readings supporting the farm workers. Again, the farm workers indirectly were able to raise huge cultural capital by getting people involved. So these are just examples of how, you know, you've got poets jumping in and saying, we're supporting the farm workers. It's a big draw. It makes a poster. It raises money. It raises the issue. Carlos Cortez again. the whole issue of the 99% and the 1%. Theater, theater's always been great, $11.99, service employees. And some of these issues are harder to pin down because some areas are poorly represented in this. And if you know of any labor posters, please let me know. I'm slowly building out this virtual collection, but there's a lot of, everybody's got a little stash of something somewhere, and you never know when that one poster may be the only example. I mean, this one here of Association of Women in Industry in Birmingham. I mean, this is and this is probably early 70s. I want to know more about this. Here's an organizing campaign around the environment and labor. So, you start getting some interesting posters that raise more questions than they answer. There's a lot of research to be done here. This is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg. And obviously the issues continue. Labor is on the ropes right now. Labor needs as much help as it can get. Labor's fighting back against bad public opinion, against bad leaders. And so labor organizing needs graphics and culture as much as ever. The whole issue of supporting immigrant rights, supporting the rights of workers to maintain pensions, supporting public workers, the notion of where the job's going, who defines new job strategies, Starbucks. People have a right to organize, and this is going on now. This is not just nostalgia. It's not just history. This is a poster from last year, from the Oakland General Strike. Over there, this is just this year as well. No justice, no. This is out of, I think it's Detroit. No justice, no peace. Boycott, most party. So these, there's always a role for artists and labor to work together, and it's a very, very powerful alliance. And so, before I go too far, I also just want to talk a little bit about, again, I mentioned the hidden history of the work that goes into making even these posters. When I go to travel to these archives, I'm a librarian and an archivist, and there's a huge amount of unsung labor in the stacks, in processing, that I want to give a call out to all the workers in this library that don't do public faces, that are behind the scenes, that make this place run. You guys do a really wonderful job, and you deserve our support. So thank you. So, even labor sometimes doesn't recognize all the hidden labor. So this is me, this is what I do. I respond to email, and I really am pleased to be here, and I'm willing to answer questions, and thank you all for coming.